Coming from Pakistan, I was just so sure that I would attend college and I'd be so cared for and so supported. That's with a lot of students, students coming from unsupported backgrounds, but there really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to things.
For any parallel interview, take one.
There's a lot of misconceptions that because you're in college, you're well off, you're privileged, and you have resources, and that these students don't have insecurities. But unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of students in the US. There's a lot of stigma when it comes to seeking out for help, and I think there's a huge role in institutions to help sort of normalize that help-seeking behavior.
It's actually unfortunate that we have created a society where folks do not feel like they can ask for help or that they will be shamed. How are we ensuring that every student, no matter their religious background, their socioeconomic status, their race, that they are supported through their college journey?
Addressing students' needs is a moral imperative. Making sure that students have the resources they need to get to and through the finish line is incredibly important.
Basic needs insecurities look like different things. It's multidimensional and multifaceted. Just because you're insecure in housing doesn't mean you're not insecure in food. In my own experience as a first-generation low-income Latina student, it was really hard to find resources that were either culturally competent to my background, but also accessible and inclusive.
It's incredibly important to expand our view of what it means to address folks' basic needs and to expand our definition of basic needs insecurity. So someone who's experiencing food insecurity is more likely to need help paying their rent, right? Is more likely to need cash assistance at some point, is more likely to need support affording childcare. So making sure that our solutions are interlocking and intersectional as well, that we're not just solving one problem, that we're trying to solve many different problems.
Students who experience basic needs challenges compared to students who have their basic needs met, there's a difference in their retention rates. There's less students that complete or graduate, and we know that there's a GPA difference.
If we're going to build a stronger community, build a more educated populace, college needs to be as accessible to as many people as possible.
We are dealing with a generation of students who have been told that in order to pursue their dreams or to get themselves out of their low-income socioeconomic status, that they had to acquire a college degree to do so. At this same time, prices spiked to attend colleges and universities. What happened at the same time is these same students who took out these massive loans, again, in order to pursue their higher education, were then saddled with this student loan debt that they unfortunately are struggling to pay back.
And even though they're working their way and maximizing their financial aid package, they're graduating with debt. And that's not because they're lazy or they're irresponsible, but because the economy has shifted.
There are so many misconceptions about who students are. And I think that's the main thing we have to do from a policy perspective going forward, is change the narrative about who students are and what they're experiencing.
Considering that 70% of students across the nation who are pursuing a post-secondary degree are what would be considered a non-traditional student, it likely is time to use different qualifiers when we're talking about students.
Close to a quarter of today's students are parents themselves. They need flexible schedules. They need childcare on campuses. And there are programs that help provide that, but there's even interesting research showing that many campus-based childcare centers actually go to faculty and staff.
College and universities were established to maintain power.
That being that many of our institutions were created primarily to benefit and educate white men, plays itself out in how we frame various dialogues, the way we look at various disciplines, and what we look as the standard.
If we're going to put our money where our mouth is on things like racial equity and upward mobility, We have to meet basic needs.
A lot of students come to college to improve their life, but sometimes higher ed education institutions aren't built upon, how to help those students appropriately.
We need to reform our public benefit programs to remove the bad and outdated and antiquated assumptions that carve students out and make it so that students are uniquely disadvantaged by these programs. But make it so it's less bureaucratic, make it so that there's fewer hoops that they have to jump through, and make it so that some of the interpretations of eligibility are as generous for students as possible.
When we have policymakers who think that if you're struggling to put food on the table or if you can't make rent, you should just work harder, and where not being able to afford rent and not being able to put food on the table is seen as a personal failure rather than an institutional failure. Maybe you do have a food pantry on campus, but does a student who is Muslim only eats halal, student who is Jewish who only eats kosher, are they able to access that food pantry? Or is that food pantry on the 7th floor of somewhere tucked away? Not only having these services available, but also making sure that students know about it, whether it's through a statement in the syllabus or making sure your faculty is letting students know that there are facilities available for them.
That's why I always say student voices, go to the students first, because what they're saying is vital to not only their success, but our success as a college.
We are all here for one thing and one thing only, and that's students.
If you sit down with people who are directly impacted by policies, they can tell you solutions for those policies as well.
Ultimately, really addressing basic needs on a campus is systems change.
My advice to the colleges and universities that want to go down this path is you already have donors who would be interested in supporting initiatives like a food pantry on your campus or emergency grant funds when a student finds themselves in an economic crisis. And if you're a state institution like we are, you have legislators in your state who know that the workforce of your state relies on being inclusive. It has to grow.
It is a social justice issue because public education is a public good. Post-secondary education is a legitimate need for many people. You may not have started in the same place as your classmates, but you can end in a similar place. And so if we're going to make good on that invitation for people to come to post-secondary institutions, we have to meet their needs.
I would think about what resources or networks are you tapped into. There are community-based organizations. In the movement, you don't just have one person moving a whole movement forward, you have multiple people.
We're fighting a juggernaut that was created long before we were in existence, well before we were thought of. We are not the first to tackle this, but we have to continue to fight.
What gives me hope is this generation. We are talking about young, courageous leaders. They are the blueprint. They are our blueprint for what it means to really seek freedom, to seek justice unequivocally. I'm just honored to be able to work with a lot of the young leaders right now, and I'm just looking forward to seeing what they'll do in the future and how I can support them.